Here's what's coming up on The World Today. Joe Biden meets Pope Francis in Rome ahead of G20 summit. UN chief says G20 leaders must do more on climate and address mistrust. Plus, UK warns France of retaliation over fishing rights dispute. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. US President Joe Biden has arrived in Europe ahead of the G20 summit of major economies this weekend and next week's key UN climate summit, COP26, in Scotland. The US President met the Pope and praised him for his leadership on climate change, saying he's the most significant warrior for peace he's ever met. The Vatican says the private meeting lasted an hour and 15 minutes, and then about another 15 minutes were spent for picture taking and the exchange of gifts in the presence of other members of the delegation. The VOA's White House Bureau Chief, Patsy Widakuswara, is in Rome. She joins us now for more. Patsy, that meeting with the Pope seemed very warm. They're reported to have spoken for about 90 minutes, a very long time compared to former US presidents. Do we know what they spoke about during that time?
Well, President Joe Biden did answer some of our questions after he came out of that meeting. One of the issues that was also outlined by various White House officials prior to the meeting is that the two leaders will discuss issues like climate change and global inequality post-pandemic recovery. These are two issues that will also be discussed at the G20 summit by world leaders. And one thing that was not discussed was the issue of Biden's support for abortion. You may know that some of the U.S. bishops have said that Joe Biden, as well as other politicians who support abortion, does not have the right or should not have the right to receive Holy Communion. President Joe Biden was asked about this issue, whether the issue of abortion came up. He said, no, they did not discuss abortion. And he said that the Pope continues to support his right to continue receiving communion. So those were some of the issues that were discussed. And as you said, it was quite a long meeting. It was a long private audience, almost 90 minutes before the two leaders, President Joe Biden participated in an expanded delegates meeting with other Vatican officials. So certainly something that the president seems to be happy about. He joked that the Pope was just happy that he was a good Catholic. As you know, President Joe Biden is only the second American president who is a Catholic who has met the Pope. The last one was John F. Kennedy in the 1960s. Taniola.
Well, it's a busy weekend for world leaders. We have the G20 summit and then preparations for the COP26 summit. We know that President Biden has also met with the Italian Prime Minister. What was that like and what was on the agenda for them?
Yeah, certainly this is one of the first bilateral meetings. The president had a meeting with the host, obviously, Italy, to talk about a number of issues, kind of like a convergence of minds ahead of the G20, some of the things that they will outline in the summit. Obviously, the U.S. is also interested in having Italy in terms of transatlantic relationship, particularly after Angela Merkel of Germany will be leaving the world stage soon. So this is something that the two leaders really focus about, the issue of climate change that will be heavily discussed, as well as other issues of concern. And after the meeting with President of Italy, as well as the Prime Minister of Italy, President Joe Biden is also meeting with another ally, that is French President Emmanuel Macron.
Yeah, and speaking of that meeting with Emmanuel Macron, I believe all eyes are on this meeting because of the AUKUS pact dispute. So I'm guessing that this will be the focus of their talks.
Yeah, I mean, they have finished meeting. Just a few minutes ago, President Joe Biden came out and spoke to reporters, and he seemed very contrite. And he said that the AUKUS deal, where the U.S. and the UK provided nuclear-powered submarines to Australia, at the same time scuttling a previous deal already agreed between Canberra and Paris, and also on the supply of submarines, even though they're not nuclear powered. And President Joe Biden basically just admitted that the AUKUS announcement was clumsy. Those were his words. He said it was not done with a lot of grace. And he said that he was under the impression that French had already known about the AUKUS deal. So obviously that was an issue that the two leaders tried to overcome. You know, this was definitely a big diplomatic spat a month ago. It caused a lot of ruffles. France recalled their ambassador to the U.S. Temporarily. And the U.S. sent in Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, national advisor, as well as Secretary of State Anthony Blinken to Paris to smooth feathers over this issue, as well as other issues that rankled allies in Europe, including the messy withdrawal from Afghanistan. So it was a bit of a heavy lift from President Joe Biden in meeting with both France as well as Italian leaders today in terms of strengthening U.S.-Europe relationship ahead of the two summits this week.
Yeah. So speak to us about what else is planned for the president as he prepares for the G20 summit and, of course, the COP26 summit in Glasgow.
So while we were aboard Air Force One on the way from Washington, D.C. to Rome, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan briefed us on what to expect in the next couple of days. Number one, there's certainly the issue of not only pandemic recovery, but also pandemic preparedness. There's an expectation that leaders may want to signal some sort of intent to work together on a financing framework, coordination framework to prevent future pandemics. This is something that has already been suggested or proposed by Secretary Janet Yellen, U.S. Treasury Janet Yellen, and as well as issues like climate financing. This is a very big issue for developing countries, including Indonesia, who will be next year's G20 president, who is saying that developed countries who pledge to help developing countries with $100 billion per year minimum to help mitigate the impact of climate change, to help developing countries transition from fossil fuel to renewables. Where is that money? Because there have been pledges and pledges and pledges, and it's still the money has not materialized. So this is something that is key for developing countries. It will be discussed at the G20 on top of other issues, including how to solve the global supply chain crisis, as well as debt restructuring. These are very important issues for developing countries and will be presented and will be addressed by all the leaders of the G20 in the coming 2 days.
Yeah, Patsy, a very busy weekend ahead. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
My pleasure.
Meanwhile, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is warning that the world is rushing headlong towards climate disaster and says leaders of the group of 20 wealthy nations must do more to help low-income countries. Speaking on the eve of the G20 Leaders Summit, Mr. Guterres says there's a dangerous level of mistrust between nations and says he hopes the forthcoming two-day meeting would help overcome that. He also urged the G20 to funnel more funds to developing countries and boost their access to COVID-19 vaccinations.
But let's be clear, there is a serious risk that Glasgow will not deliver. Several recent climate announcements might leave the impression of a rosier picture. Unfortunately, this is an illusion. The current nationally determined contributions, formal commitments by governments, still condemn the world to a calamitous 2.7-degree increase. Even if recent pledges were clear and credible, and there are serious questions about some of them, we are still careening towards climate catastrophe. Under the best-case scenario, temperatures will still rise well above 2 degrees, and that is a disaster. I think we are still on time to put things on track, and I think this G20 meeting is the opportunity to do that. So, this is not the moment to announce the results of Glasgow. This is the moment to push for Glasgow to have the right results. And today, trust is in short supply. there are serious questions of credibility. We see dangerous levels of mistrust among the big powers, among members of the G20, between developed and developing countries, including emerging economies. And so the most important objective of this G20 summit must be to reestablish trust by tackling the main sources of mistrust, rooted in injustices, inequalities, and geopolitical divides.
Ci siamo appena arrivati alle 10, faccio fare queste foto così poi facciamo...
Well, as G20 leaders prepare to meet, Oxfam, Amnesty International and Emergency have held a flash mob in Rome to demand leaders end global inequality of access to vaccines and coronavirus treatments. The activists wore white masks and suits and white lab coats as they stood by a coffin with 5 million deaths written across it, throwing money into the air. Oxfam says the flash mob represents an appeal to world leaders to act to suspend monopolies on COVID-19 vaccines, allowing production in low-income countries where only a small percentage of the population is currently vaccinated.
Today, as we speak, only 1.8% of people in poor countries are fully vaccinated, compared with 60 to 70% in Europe, for example. And that's just intolerable. We can only beat the virus if we are safe all over the world. So what we demand from the G20 is to distribute existing vaccines in a more just way. So everybody has to have access to vaccines, no matter where he or she lives.
Don't you touch that! And to another anticipated summit, Friday for future protesters, including teenage climate activist Greta Thunberg, have taken to the streets in London ahead of the COP26 summit. The protesters called on financial institutions to stop funding the extraction of fossil fuels. This week, a United Nations report said current pledges put the world on track for an average 2.7 degrees Celsius temperature rise, and a separate report in August warned that global warming caused by greenhouse gas emissions could breach 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next 2 decades.
The Philippines is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world to the climate crisis, and Standard Chartered Bank is fueling most of that destruction in our country. They are the biggest international bank that is funding the most fossil fuel companies in my country, the Philippines, which is ravaged by typhoons year after year. They've brought destruction to our doorstep, so we're here at their doorstep to demand for justice and to demand them to defund climate chaos.
It's such a crucial turning point, and at COP, I want to see action. Enough of the empty promises. We have to see action in line with 1.5 degrees targets, which countries haven't met since they signed the Paris Agreement. And we have to see those voices who are on the front lines of the crisis there. We have to see marginalised communities there, and we have to have the social aspects of that included within climate policies. It's just absolutely crucial.
And in Glasgow, the location for the COP26 United Nations Climate Summit, protesters have also demonstrated as attendees queue to register for the meeting, which kicks off on Sunday. Protesters with Ocean Rebellion called attention to oil spills and damage done to the world's oceans by fossil fuel companies. Tens of thousands of attendees are expected to attend the summit at the Scottish Event Campus in central Glasgow from October the 31st to November the 12th.
So we know that our whole financial system at the moment is embroiled with the fossil fuel industry, and we need to find a way to get out of that and to move the money into climate solutions rather than the causes of climate change. And I think something that this COP ought to achieve is getting together the finance to do that. We need to raise the money from the richer nations in order to fund the necessary work in poorer countries to mitigate climate change, but also respond to the effects of it that are already happening. So that's something I really hope to see, is that the money is actually raised, because that's something which is really key right now.
Still to come on the programme. Officials say no end in sight to volcanic eruption on Spain's La Palma. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. The United Kingdom has warned France it could take retaliatory measures if Paris presses ahead with threatened sanctions amid a post-Brexit dispute over fishing rights. British Environment Secretary George Ostis says that Britain reserves the right to respond to any action in a proportionate way. The two sides are at loggerheads over the number of licenses the UK has handed French vessels keen to fish in its territorial waters. Paris has accused the UK of unfairly restricting boats from operating in its waters around the Channel Island of Jersey, a British Crown dependency that lies 22 kilometres off the coast of France. It says London's actions violate the post-Brexit agreement the UK signed in December 2020, 11 months after it formally left the EU on January the 31st last year. The EU says Iran and world powers seeking to revive a 2015 nuclear deal are trying to agree a date for the resumption of talks in Vienna as soon as possible. Iran's top negotiator said after talks in Brussels this week, the negotiations will resume by the end of November. In April, Tehran and 6 powers started to discuss ways to salvage the 2015 nuclear pact, which 3 years ago, then U.S. President Donald Trump abandoned. Former President Trump then reimposed sanctions on Iran that have devastated its economy by squeezing its oil exports. But the talks have been on hold since the election of Iran's hardline president, Ibrahim Raisi, in June, who is expected to take a tough approach if the talks resume in Vienna.
But I can confirm that there was a useful meeting between Chief Iranian Negotiator, Vice or Deputy Foreign Minister Bagheri, and our Chief Negotiator when it comes to JCPOA, who is also Political Director and Deputy Secretary General of the EAS, Enrique Mora. So there was a useful meeting between the two of them 2 days ago, and it helped to identify a way forward to resume the negotiations in Vienna. HRVP, as a JCPOA coordinator together with his team, they remain engaged towards this aim and now are working together with other partners, including Iran and other signatories of the JCPOA, to fix a concrete date as early as possible to reconvene in Vienna.
The top U.S. representative in Taiwan, Sandra Woodkirk, says that the United States is committed to helping Taiwan defend itself amid heightened tensions between Taipei and Beijing. Speaking to reporters at her first news conference since assuming her post in July, she describes U.S. relations with Taiwan as rock solid. Her remarks come as tensions between Taiwan and China, which has not ruled out taking the democratically ruled island by force, has escalated in recent weeks.
We continue to have a shared and abiding interest in peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The U.S. considers this central to the security and stability of the broader Indo-Pacific region and to the United States, and we are deeply concerned by ongoing PRC efforts to undermine that stability. Our commitment to Taiwan is rock solid and contributes to the maintenance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and within the region. So the United States has a commitment to help Taiwan provide for its self-defense. And that's part of the Taiwan Relations Act. It's a commitment we take very seriously. We engage with our partners in Taiwan, on a routine basis to assess vulnerabilities, to assess ways we can support Taiwan in kind of mounting its own self-defense.
To the COVID-19 pandemic, the nation island of Tonga has reported its first coronavirus infection since the beginning of the pandemic after a passenger traveling from New Zealand tested positive. Here's more on this and other developments from around the world on our COVID-19 Global Update.
Tonga is amongst the few remaining nations in the world that have avoided outbreaks of COVID-19. The island's first case was identified amongst 215 passengers who arrived from the New Zealand city of Christchurch. Located northeast of New Zealand, Tonga is home to about 106,000 people. About 31% of Tongans are fully vaccinated and 48% have had at least one dose. South Korea says it will drop all operating hour curbs on restaurants and cafes and implements its first vaccine passport for high-risk venues such as gyms and bars. Officials say the first phase will go into effect on Monday and last for a month, with plans calling for all restrictions to be scrapped by February. Russia has reported 1,163 new deaths, its highest one-day toll of the pandemic, amidst a surge in cases that has forced officials to reimpose partial lockdown measures. Deaths have set new records in 9 of the past 11 days. The country also recorded 39,841 new coronavirus cases in the last 24 hours. The country will go into a nationwide workplace shutdown in the first week of November. And finally, Indonesia's President Joko Widodo has urged richer countries to share their vaccines with poorer countries. Mr. Widodo says it shouldn't be just a few countries that get all the vaccines, and some other countries can get only a little. He was speaking ahead of a visit to the G20 and COP26 meetings, where he will be meeting other world leaders.
In Australia, cleanup has begun in Melbourne after severe storms ripped through properties and uprooted trees. During the storm on Thursday, one property in Melbourne had the roof come down into the bedroom with debris strewn over the yard. The Victorian State Emergency Service said it was responding to hundreds of calls for help as a severe weather warning remains in place for parts of Victoria. And now let's take a look at these stunning images from the eruption of Spain's La Palma volcano. As the eruption continues into its second month, and officials say there's no end in sight. Lava from the volcano has covered nearly 900 hectares of land, destroying 2,000 buildings and many banana plantations since the eruption started on September the 19th. The Prime Minister says Spain would speed up aid to the hard-hit agriculture and fishing industries on the island. More than 7,000 people have had to evacuate their homes. Spectacular, but very deadly. And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shaboale.